Hey, I'm Morgan, and this is the PS We Expire podcast.
Our hustle society tells us that busyness is good. It's a status symbol. It's a sign of importance. It's how we define success. And as a matter of fact, we get a hit of adrenaline whenever we're busy, whenever we cross something off the to-do list. But the reality is busyness is a addiction, like all addictions. They say an addiction is something that takes you away from a normal life, things you would normally be doing, things that you should be doing. And when we're busy, we put so many important things like our health, our loved ones, day to day things that bring us joy and make us more efficient, more effective. We put them on the side because we're just stuck in this hamster wheel, this cycle of busyness. And the research that I've done has told me that 94% of Americans are stuck on a hamster wheel and don't know how to get off. They want to get off. They're realizing that they're burnt out, they're overwhelmed, they're stressed, they're not happy, their marriages are just, disintegrating, their relationships. They're starting to see all of that, but they don't know how. What is the secret sauce? And for me, that's the research that I've been doing over the last 10 years, is to understand the how to, so that we can not just talk about the problem but actually do something about it.
How much of this do you think is a problem with people believing that they have permission to start saying no to things or to slow down or get off of that hamster wheel?
I think when you learn how to say no in a way that makes sense, in a way that is a collective win, they say negotiating is really about a collective win, finding the win win. And so I'd like to share with you a situation I had with somebody I've been doing some consulting with. And they spent 83% of their time in meetings. And so, it really prevented him from doing the strategic work, from him doing the work as that he should have been doing as a leader, the market research, the competitive work, everything that he should have been doing. He was just bottled up in meetings, and he would tell me, Peggy, I have to go to these meetings. I have to be at these meetings. And he would always tell me why. I never thought it was, really good reasons. I need to be seen, my boss is having the meeting. I need to know what my employees are doing. All these great excuses. And I asked him to take 1 week, take a step back and look at the meetings he had on schedule, and to not participate in the meetings where he didn't get value or give value. It's very simple. Do you get value? Do you give value? So he found out what those meetings were, and we worked on a script for him to go to his management team, basically saying, I know these are the objectives of my role, and this is what I want to focus on. And I know this is how we measure success, and this is an obstacle. Spending so much time in meetings, look at my calendar, it's 83% of my day. This isn't helping us achieve our goals. So, can we decide together what meetings come off the calendar so I can actually do the work that will actually improve our bottom line? And it's pretty crazy how, when you ask that question and actually talk to people about it, that's what they want. They want to set their employees up for success. They want their leaders to be successful. They want their corporations to reach their goals and have bottom line success. And we can't do that when we're doing low value things that just don't have a lot of value to them. And yet we do a lot of low value things.
How would you define something that's low value? Because is there a difference between low value and low importance?
I don't know that there's a difference between low value and low importance. When I say low value, I mean at the end of the day, when you look at what your values are, when you look at what your goals and your objectives are, if these things don't advance that in a very strategic way, then chances are they're low values. I a lot of times talk to people about their email habits.
Mm.
And people on average spend a couple of hours looking at email every single day. And we want to know what's going on and we want to keep on top of it, or else we'll turn around and have 500 emails to go and answer back to. But the reality is, when we stop and we start and we look at
Mm.
emails, first thing in the morning, it takes us away from the time that we should be planning our day and actually doing some work. And then all this stop and start every time there's a ding ding ding, you've got mail. It's very distracting and very interrupting. And so one of the lowest value things outside of meetings is the way we participate with always on communication. Whether it's you always leave your phone on, no matter what, you always answer your messages, no matter what, you've got a group chat you go to, your email, because the reality is most of us have a job where if we can respond to somebody in one day, that's good enough. And so if we establish processes where we do one thing at a time and we really focus our energy on that one thing, then we can get it done with more quality and at a greater speed. And so all this multitasking and all this always on communications, it's not really helping us. And those are things that I consider low value. The other things that I consider low value are things like not taking care of yourself. If you don't get a good night's sleep, if you don't eat, if you don't take breaks, you are not setting yourself up for success. And so, this whole notion of self care being an added value, and I'll take care of myself when I have time,
Mm.
is really a bunch of nonsense because you're actually a lot more productive when you do take care of yourself. And I actually personally have been working towards spending a couple of hours of self care on myself a couple of days a week and actually measuring my productivity when I did that versus, leaving the self care to the end of the day. And gee, no big surprise, I was a
Mm.
lot more productive when I had carved out time for self care. I just, my brain was all cylinders up and I was much more focused. And the other thing is, people love being with people that are happy and people that are up. And if all you're doing is working and neglecting yourself, you tend to be grumpy and unhappy, and that's never a good place to be.
Yeah. How what are some of the self-care things that you participate in? And also, do you think that there are ways that people talk about self-care that are not actually self-care? Like activities that would say, "Oh, this is self-care," but it really isn't.
Yeah, I think of self care as energy management and how I manage my physical, my mental, and my spiritual health. So for me, anything that falls in that bucket is all part of self care. And for me personally, I know how important it is for me to get my workouts in. I know how important it is for me to do my yoga. I do cold plunging. I love it. It makes me very alert, makes me feel very resilient. If I can sit in a cold tub for 9 minutes, I can do anything. No
Mm.
challenge is too big. So, this idea of self care and eating healthfully, I mean, how good do you feel when you're not eating a lot of processed foods? It's just amazing. And so, there are so many things that we can do that we don't make time to do that really make us stronger, healthier, happier, more productive human beings. And they're taking care of yourself spiritually, making sure you're connecting with people is very important too. We live in a society that has loneliness at an all-time high. And if you really think about it, was it one in every 10 people are feel completely isolated and alone at least once a week.
Mhm.
And then most people feel it every couple of days. That's huge. We're too busy to pay attention to people, and isn't that what we're on earth for? Is to help other people and really contribute to making the world a better place. So self care is to me a lot more than, going for a 5 minute walk or, not eating dessert for dinner. There's so many aspects to spiritual, mental self health, human connection, spending times doing things that bring you joy. All of that is very, very important.
So when you're talking with someone who already feels stressed and overwhelmed and maxed out, and we're talking about something like self-care, I imagine someone looking at that as just like another thing to add to their to-do list. Like, okay, now I have to like be meal planning or eating better and working out and getting more sleep and all of this. And so I think that's why some people don't even allow themselves to consider adding those things into their lives, because it just feels like something else to do. So for someone who is thinking about this, just feels way too overwhelming to adjust my life to this, how would you recommend that they start to do this in a manageable way that doesn't feel like they're just drowning
Yeah.
more?
I would like to share a story with you about Jennifer. Jennifer is a national controller of a very, very large financial management institution. She has hundreds of people reporting to her. She's also a single mother with three children, and she manages a household. So while she loved her career, she was feeling like she never had time for herself. And at one point in time, she came home from work, she picked up her kids, she got the Kentucky Fried Chicken, they sat in front of the TV, they did the takeout, playing their games, and she realized, gee, I've got to do laundry. I haven't done laundry in a while. And as she was walking over to the laundry room, she tripped over the 3 weeks of laundry that were sitting there waiting to be done. And she just sat on the floor and just felt hopeless. And lucky enough, her daughter called me and said, Mom's on the floor. She can't get up. She won't get up. She's sobbing. What can we do? And so I went over there and I said, Look, she says, I have no time for self care, but like I feel like I'm being sucked into this bottomless pit. And I said, Well, you're thinking about self care in a way that is unapproachable. Let's start small. What would happen if you did 5 minutes of self care every day? What would happen because you have no time in your day for being alone and gathering your thoughts? What happened if you got up 5 minutes earlier and spent 5 minutes, just spending it with yourself and just thinking and just be listening to music, just doing something really very calming and very soothing. And so she did that the first week. And she's like, that wasn't so hard, 5 times 6, a half an hour I spent to myself. That wasn't so hard. So then we decided, okay, well, you're doing that before you go to work. What are you going to do at work? Because you have a lot of stress at work. And we talked about the fact that she never takes a break at work. She just goes from one thing to another, to another, to another, because she has the pressure of picking up her children at the end of the day. And so I said, well, what would happen if you blocked out 15 minutes every day, 12 to 12:15, and all you did was grabbed a sandwich, walked outside, and felt the sun on your face, and just took a deep breath and just pressed the reset button. So she goes and she does that 15 minutes, right? So now she's up to 20 minutes a day. This is week 2, and she's already starting to feel more energized and better. Week 3, we're like, okay, I'm not going to spend more than 45 minutes on myself a day. What is the last thing I can do? And I said, well, what's going on at night? What are you doing with your evenings? And she says, oh, I just get so stressed out at the end of the night because I think about everything I need to do, and it just keeps me up. And when I ask her what keeps you up at night, she says, my things to do list is so long, it's not possible to get done. And so what we decided that instead of her looking at her things to do list and thinking that, she would keep a gratitude journal. And before she went to bed, she would think about three things that she was grateful for, and she would write them in her journal. And guess what happened? She started sleeping better, and she was able to wake up a little bit earlier and have more time by herself. And so it's really about these micro steps that we take, not trying to make radical changes. Gee, I'm going to go start exercising, I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week. It's too much of a commitment. But when you start with this little baby micro step that's doable and you feel a little bit relief, then it all of a sudden becomes something that you make a big priority in your life.
I love that it didn't cost anything extra. It didn't require her getting up super duper early. I imagine people thinking, I'm going to get up earlier so that I can tackle more of the things on my to-do list. And I like that shift of I'm going to get up just a little bit earlier just for me, just for me.
Yeah, just for me. And you're talking about your things to do list. I talked a lot about me being a research geek, but one of the things I find is that 75% of individuals realize that their daily things to do list is impossible. So why do we set ourselves up for failure? I start every day. I have a things to do list, and I start my day by subtracting the low value things. I'll look at what's most important, what's least important. I'll cross it off my list. I'll save it for a rainy day, or I'll decide, gee, I really don't need to be doing that. And that's why subtraction is such a powerful way to focus and be more intentional with how you spend your time. Because when you subtract these low value activities, then you get so much back. I'm teaching a course at Johns Hopkins, and I was speaking with one of the leaders there, and she was telling me about how the news really upset her lately. And she used to love listening to NPR, and now when she listens, she gets upset. And I said, well, why don't you just turn the TV off? Why do you have to listen to NPR every night and have all this stuff rattling in your head? Just turn off the TV. Don't do it. Guess what? She turned off the TV, and she's not as agitated as she was when she was seeing all this stuff happen that she wasn't comfortable with. And so I think as human beings, we have so much power. We don't even realize how much power we have. And that's what's really about. It's about taking back the power of the things you can control. And there are a lot of things that we can control.
I like what I hear in this is like that sometimes they're the simplest solution doesn't even occur to us. Like it doesn't even occur to us that we could just turn the TV off or turn the news off or not watch the news. That's so funny. So what how did you come to this uh time poverty knowledge in your personal life? Can you talk a little bit about how
Sure.
that became something that you became really passionate about helping other people with?
I didn't know it, but throughout most of my life, I've been an addict. And I've been addicted to being busy, getting things done, crossing them off the list, raising the bar. I think something that we're all familiar with, but I didn't really think about it as an addiction because for me, addiction was more about drugs. It was about alcohol. It was, about the established addictions. But when I really started looking to the nature of addiction, I realized that the American Psychiatric Association describes an addiction as something that takes you away from things you normally do, you should be doing, you need to be doing, you want to be doing. And when we are busy, we're not doing the things we need, we want, and we should be doing. And so for me, busyness is an addiction. Every time I cross something off the list, I get a hit of adrenaline. So I want to cross something else off the list, even if it is low value transaction. And so a lot of it is about recognizing that busyness is an addiction and that we do get actual stimulation when we cross something off the list. So step 2 of my busy busting process is very intentional. It's about what I call mojo making. It's about happiness rituals and creating happiness rituals on a regular basis in an intentional way so that your brain gets the benefit of an endomorphic rush, which gives you more focus, more concentration, more energy, more feel good. It fights off chronic disease, heart disease. I mean, happiness is a superpower, and yet, as human beings, we think happiness, it's a destination, it's a thing. I'm going to be happy when I get married, when I have a baby, when I have the promotion. It's always, I need to earn this. Well, what if we
Mhm.
flip that paradigm? And what if happiness was a gift we gave to ourselves and we just had these little tiny happiness rituals on a regular basis? I get up in the morning and my cat always wants to be fed, and I feed him. And then instead of going right to work or doing all the things that I should be doing, I take a brush and I start brushing him. And it makes me so happy because he starts to purr and hum and sing and roll on his back. And it's just a small thing. It doesn't cost any money. But I know I'm bringing joy to my fur baby, and that makes me feel good. And so it's a happiness ritual I do every day. I brush my fur baby every day in the morning, and there are other things that I do too that are, are little happiness rituals. As a matter of fact, I tell people set time aside for happiness rituals several times a day. For the longest time, I ate dark chocolate at 11 a.m. I would grab 3 pieces of dark chocolate. I'd sit in a corner, I'd unwrap them, I'd close my eyes, and I would just smell and taste the candy. It really got to a point where I was like moaning with delight because maybe it was the cacao, or maybe it was just the fact that I was spending a couple of minutes by
Mhm.
myself, but it just brought me such pleasure. And so I do that a lot too. Just eat a couple of pieces of dark chocolate, close my eyes, and it's like, bing, just push the
Mhm.
reset button. And that's a great thing. So, I think happiness rituals and really stepping into it. And it's funny because when I worked in corporate America, and I still work in corporate America, I thought happiness rituals were just for individuals. So when I headed up a customer service department at United Healthcare, and I was tasked with improving their service metrics, I thought, well, gee, maybe they need a new phone system, or maybe they need, new processes. And I thought about the traditional things that most people were doing in service departments to improve metrics. And instead, I said, what if I focus on the people? What if I give them a reset button a couple of times a day? So we started to across the world on a national basis. We meet via Zoom and we spend 4 to 5 minutes of happiness rituals. And they could be as silly as singing happy birthday to somebody,
Mhm.
somebody showing a photo of a newborn baby. One time we did funny faces. Dance parties were really, really popular. 4 minutes of just dancing at your
Mhm.
office. And, they work in the workplace to motivate people and to help people push the reset button. And so I'm a firm believer in this thing that I call happiness rituals. My first book was about happiness, the neuroscience of happiness. And I can remember my mother, who died a really hard death. She was really ill for quite some time, in a lot of pain. But the last week of her life, she wasn't. And I remember asking her what changed, because she knew she was going to die. She knew death was imminent. She knew she still had a lot of pain. And she said, I discovered a secret. And I said, what's that, Mom? She says, I discovered that my happiness is my responsibility. So I've decided this last week that I'm on earth, I am absolutely going to just enjoy myself and be happy. And it's a mindset. And it made it so much easier for us, but it really made me realize that happiness is our responsibility.
That's lovely. Thank you for sharing that story. I want to come back to that you said that the happiness ritual is the step 2. Can you talk about what step 1 is? Maybe we already touched on that, and then what the subsequent steps are, and what exactly the steps are part of. What's the program a
Right.
part of?
Well, when I came to the conclusion that busyness is an addiction and that time poverty is one of the number one challenges all human beings are faced, I wanted to come up with a solution to escape time poverty. How can we get people into a mode where they end their day saying, I had a great day, instead of, I wish I had time for that? And I had no idea what that something was going to look like and what the process was going to look like. So for about 10 years, I did a lot of experimenting. I ran a lot of workshops. I did a lot of consulting. And what I found was that this three-step busy busting process actually works and helps people turn time poverty into time wealth. Step one in the busy busting process we talked about, and that's subtraction. It's about subtracting low value activities. You can't want to do more and achieve more when you're over the top busy. You need to subtract something. So this whole idea of subtraction and subtracting low value activities, gives people an opportunity to breathe, to get a breath of fresh air, and to start to feel like they can control their lives and they can start to think. Step two in the process was, okay, so we're not busy all the time. We're not getting this endorphin rush all the time. What can we do to get our endorphins going and to get the benefits of happiness and the superpowers that come with it? Because you read any study, and there are so many studies about the neurology of happiness, but it's so good for us. We're so much more productive. We're so much more likable. We're able to focus, fight off chronic health. The list just goes on and on. So I thought, okay, let's erase this notion that happiness is a destination, it's a thing. Why don't we make happiness something we can control, that we can give to ourselves on a daily basis? And so I created step two, which is all about happiness rituals and practicing them in the workplace and outside of the workplace. And then the third step in the busy busting process is what I call values vibing. And it's about understanding what's important to you and aligning your day to day decisions with your values. I speak and have spoken a lot about values, and it's always been curious to me that when I ask people what their values are, if I'm in a room full of a couple hundred people, they kind of look at their next door neighbor and see what their next door neighbor is writing. Or my favorite is they'll Google values, and they'll look at the list and they'll be like, oh, honesty is really important to me, and a hard work ethic is really important to me. And then I'll be like, well, do those things at the end of your day, if you were truthful all day long and you didn't lie all week long, at the end of the day, would that be something that you were just really proud of? And they said, no, it's a basic rule of engagement. I said, well, why don't you think about your values as the things that really light you up and the things that give you quality of life? And so I decided, okay, Peggy, that makes sense. What are the values that light us up? And I interviewed 12,000 individuals to find out what are the values that light us up as human beings. And I found out that there are four. And so it's pretty basic, and your interpretation of these four may be slightly different than mine. But if you have these four values in your life, then you're living a well-lived life. And they are: one, self-care, energy management. We spend a little bit of time talking about that. connection, and that's human connection. And we certainly got into a lot of bad habits around COVID and not getting out and working from home and kind of ignoring the human need for human connection. And it is a basic need. Growth is another one. My dad, God rest his soul, always used to say to me, Toots, a day without learning something new is a lost opportunity. And he was right, because when you learn, you just grow, and it's like this amazing thing that makes you feel good. And so learn something. Don't be afraid of a challenge, because when you're learning, all of a sudden you realize you can do hard things. I've been doing this cold plunging, and when I first started it, I couldn't even barely go into the cold tub for more than 10 seconds. It was hard. And then I went in for 15 seconds. And then I went in for 20 seconds. And doing the cold plunge consistently taught me that I can do hard things. And when we're growing and when we're learning, we condition our brains that we are resilient and we can do hard things. And the fourth value outside of energy, connection, and growth is what I call authenticity. And it's kind of a double edged sword, because traditionally, we think about authenticity as, taking care of ourselves and taking care of our own needs. But I like to think about authenticity a little bit differently. uh, there are so many different people in this world that approach things differently, have different thoughts, different habits, different likes, different dislikes. We're all different. We're one big melting pot. And what if we accepted everybody else for how they showed up? And we had a little more tolerance and a little open mindedness for maybe approaching something in a different way. For a long time, I get an idea in my head and this is how I want to do it. And then you ask somebody and they give you a suggestion, and you're like, no, I'm going to go back to what I was originally thinking. Well, why did you ask for a suggestion? Maybe their idea and your idea makes a much better idea. And that's why I think authenticity is so important, because collectively, as human beings, there's so much we can accomplish, much more than we can individually, but only if we're open minded.
I want to go back to what you said about happiness is our responsibility. And I'm really curious about how our environments fit into this equation of responsibility. I think a lot about this, the metaphor of the seed, like a seed can come up through the soil, even though there's a lot of weeds around, but there's, like the sucking of the nutrients from these weeds. And so the plant isn't going to bloom in the same way that it would if the environment or conditions in which it's planted is actually conducive to its growth and its blossoming. And so I'm curious about like this, maybe it's a false dichotomy around like the happiness being your responsibility, but also recognizing the conditions that we're in, that we're planted in, and how do those work together, and how do you know when it's time for you to get out of a particular environment?
Yeah, I always bring things back to a story, and I'm going through a challenge right now. My sister is very ill, and she has a lot of health challenges that are destroying her quality of life. And it keeps me up at night, and it disturbs me, and it breaks my heart to see somebody I love going through these challenges. And for the first little bit, when we found out about these, that's all I felt was heartache and heartbreak. And then I thought to myself, well, how can I get something good out of this? You know, well, maybe it's a way for me to get closer to my sister. Maybe my sister and I can have virtual drinks every night at 6 o'clock, and she can tell me everything she's afraid of and every hope and every dream. And we're just going to giggle and laugh and have a joyous time. And what if this is the good that came out of that? Is that we are closer, and I am there to support her, and I feel good that I'm able to help her just a little bit during a hard time. She has something to look forward to in her day. So I think there's always way to find that little bit of light, and hang on to that and to grow it and to nurture it. And it's a lot about our mindset and our attitude and how we approach things. And it's normal to feel emotional about something and to react, but there is so much value in a pause. And, when you think about the outcome and you think about being intelligently selfish, and, you realize that a lot of these emotions, a lot of feelings that we have are just that. They're not real, they're feelings. Oh, gee, I'm in a bad mood. Well, really? I mean, like, can you take your temperature for a bad mood?
Hmm.
Does the temperature say you're grumpy? No. You've bought into the fact that you're in a grumpy mood. And so, what can you do to get out of that grumpy mood? And I just believe that there's always something more that we can do.
I like that idea of asking these questions about what happiness rituals can I do, I just kind of like have at hand. I think that's one of the beautiful things about doing the intentional work around the steps that you're suggesting is that when when we start to define for ourselves what those happiness rituals are, then it's much easier for us when we are feeling low and we're taking our proverbial temperature and seeing that we're grumpy, that I can say, oh, hey, like one of my happiness rituals is to go stand in the sun and feel the sun on my face. What about, I'm thinking about like a an experience for someone where they're recognizing that they need to be cutting some of these low value activities out of their lives, but for whatever reason, whether it's in their family or in their workplace, other people are not supportive of them. Like if the person who is saying, hey, I'm spending 87% of my time in these meetings and I don't think that I need to, and can we talk about this, and if the boss is saying, no, you have to be in those meetings, I guess I'm wondering at that point, like, how do you still then embrace the responsibility of your own happiness when you're not in an environment that's aligning with you?
Yeah. What I like to think is that not only are there low value activities, but there are low value humans and people that just don't add to our life. They just don't make our existence better. They make it hard. And so I try very hard for people that fall into that category to tell them, look, this is how you're making me feel, and it's not in both our best interests. Can you, please curb that behavior and give them an opportunity to change, give them an opportunity to see what's going on and to realize what they're doing, because chances are they don't know. But if ultimately you have people in your life that aren't adding value, if you can remove them, remove them. And that goes for relatives and non-relatives, and some of my family members aren't blood relatives, but they're family because they act like family, they behave like family, they earn the route. And for me, over the last couple of years, I've really stepped into few, but with more quality. And I'm realizing that with friends, with people, I want people that really have my back. And I want people, high value people in my life. And if somebody isn't adding value or not bringing out the best side of me or has aligned values, I will let them know, and I will let them know more than once. And if they can't find it within themselves, for us to be better together, then I really don't want them in my life, and I will subtract people, low value people, from my life, and I have done that.
I think it's, I could really get imagine people really getting hung up on this, the wording of saying that someone is low value, but what it sounds like to me is that it's not that they're any less valuable as a human, but that your values don't align. So like if you have a high value of a particular thing and they have a low value of that, then there's a value misalignment. And I think that that's a really helpful way for us to then embrace this idea of not everybody has to be in your life, even if they've been there for a long time, even if they're family. It's not that you're better than them or they're, not a good human or whatever. It just is a misalignment of values. And I like that the your fourth step in the busy busting process is the authenticity, because when we are telling the truth about who we are, when we're telling the truth about what our values are, when we're telling the truth about the happiness rituals that are important to us, then then we can have relationships that are much more satisfying and fulfilling.
Yeah, I my aunt is 90 years old, and like most 90-year-olds, her body is a little worn down in a couple of areas. And so, she has challenges for sure. And for the last couple of years, and I like to check in on her, and I will call her every single night and I'll be like, "Aunt A, how you doing?" And she'll get into this gloom and doom diatribe for like 15, 20 minutes, never asking me how I am, what's going in my life, never talking about anything positive or productive. So for years, I would dread calling her up. I would do it out of a sense of responsibility. And then I said to myself, you know what? I'm just going to tell her. I'm going to say, I'm really sorry you're feeling that way, but let's talk about something positive. Let's talk about something good. Or for every challenge you have, let's talk about an opportunity or something you're grateful for. And we started to change our conversations to a much more positive tone. Now I can't wait to pick up the phone.
Mhm.
She's funny. She's fun. She's telling me all these stories from her childhood. She's not, complaining about things that she can't control or the cold weather or whatever it is. She's making a real point. And so I think, to your point and touche to you, there are no low value people. Everybody on earth has this value. It is more about value alignment and making sure that you surround yourself with people. I'm a positive person. I like to be around people who feel I can find a way. Everything is possible. And so that those are the type of people that I surround myself with, like-minded people that share my values.
Hmm. I like too that just you being who you are with her and inviting her to be in that positive mindset with you, actually, I'm sure positively changed her life. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, we giggle like kids. She tells me childhood stories, and our conversations go to a very different place, and they were very consistent for many, many years. And I would call her, but I didn't want to. And now I look forward to what she's going to tell me, and what funny story, and what piece of her childhood did I not know, and something about maybe my mother who's no longer with us, or something else. Oftentimes, you know I'll be like, tell me something about my mom that I don't know, or just a simple
Hmm.
conversation like that, and it just brings me so much joy.
I wonder how many people have these dynamics in their relationships that they don't like, but they are too afraid to say something. And so, people will either continue to put up with the dreaded phone call, or they'll skip this entirely and just cut that person out of their life. And so I like this idea of kind of like what you were talking about with the man who recognized how much of his time was tied up in meetings, that the conversation that he had came from the tack of how to this is actually going to be better for both of us if we change this dynamic. And I think that will be really helpful for people to hear, even in their personal relationships, that if you can come to it from a perspective of, this is actually going to be better for our relationship dynamic if we have this conversation, and if we see how we can meet the other person's needs so that we can go forward into a more growth oriented positive relationship, instead of just bypassing that conversation altogether and like
Amen to
cutting it off or
that.
whatever.
Doing the hard things is not always the easy path to take. Sometimes it's really hard to have those hard conversations, but we grow from them, we learn from them, and we make things better. And so many times people, they just don't see it. There's it's like a habit. I always do this exercise with audiences where I tell them to cross a leg. they're sitting in a seat, cross a leg. And I'll be like, how many of you crossed your right leg? And most of them will raise their hand. And then how many crossed your left leg? And a few of them will raise their hand. And then I'll say, okay, now uncross your legs and cross it again. Did you use the same leg? They're like, yeah. It just feels more comfortable, more
Mm.
intuitive. I'd say, okay, fine. I'll put both of your feet on the ground and cross the other leg. But don't just do it once. Do it 5 times, slowly, methodically, carefully. And how does that first time feel versus that fifth time? And a lot of it is just changing our habits and getting used to changing them. The people that I coach who look at email and spend their mornings drowning in email, I tell them just put a silly little post-it note saying, no, no, no email until 10:15. And that sounds ridiculous, but keep the promise to yourself. And
Mm.
just make that promise for a couple of days and see how it works for you. It's not a lifetime commitment. And I think when people are open to these changes that feel uncomfortable, that's where we really step into our sweet spot. And for me, this beyond busyness that my new book is about and that I speak about and consult about is about stepping into your sweet spot. What makes you hum? What makes you feel alive? What brings you joy? And when you know what that is and you know how to give it to yourself, it's the greatest gift in the world.
Is this busy busting process what you take people through in your book as well?
It is. It
Okay.
is. Yeah, and it's what I speak on, and sometimes we'll just go through one step in the process because people want to focus on one piece or another step. But truly, if you just take a micro step with all three of these things, you subtract the low value activities, you add a little more happiness in, and you make sure you understand what your values are and that you align how you spend your time with your values. There is nobody who has done that who hasn't felt so much better about life in general and the quality of their life. It just works.
Mm. Can you talk about the different? So I wanted to come back to get a little bit of clarity on what you were saying with someone who says that one of their values is honesty. And you said, at the end of the day, if you've told the truth about anything, like, do you feel really good about that? And they're like, no, that's just the way that I operate. So could you talk about the difference between that and the way that you're defining values?
Yeah, I mean, I looked at it differently. Instead of me thinking about and asking a lot of people what are their core values, I did that for many years. And people were saying things that if they did at the end of the day, they were nice to haves, but they weren't need to haves in terms of quality of life. They didn't make their life, they made their life slightly better, but it was marginal. So I really wanted to understand values that really made a difference in life and what they were and what combinations were. And so, that's when I did this research study and asked 12,000 people about, what are your core values and what core values make you happy and healthy and fulfilled and feel like you filling your cup on a day in day out basis. And these were the 4 values, and I workshopped them for years, and consistently they are what people tell me makes them feel they get to the end of the day and they have a well-lived life. So it's not about a life that just focuses on work and productivity. It focuses on health. It focuses on the energy that you put out to other human beings. It just is such a beautiful, full rounded way to approach your value ecosystem. Um, and you can personalize it because, for you, energy management, maybe spiritual energy. And I have a lot of friends who get their strength, out of going to a church or a temple on a regular basis. That's great, and that works for them. And so I love these four values because you can personalize them based on your unique life. They're not cookie cut, they are general, but they're things that you need in your life to thrive. You don't have your health, you are not thriving. If you're not growing and learning how to deal with all this change that's coming after us, you're not going to be able to have a thriving life. Human connection, we are better together. Other human beings put us in, they change our mood, they pick us up, they make us feel good. And so I stick with these four core values any day. When I have these four core values in my day, it's a good day.
Hmm. I love that. I wonder if some of these other things like, autonomy, honesty, good work ethic are actually like a different part of like a subset of values, or maybe like an ethics bucket. But what I'm hearing with what you're saying about like the values vibing and the four values that contribute um, to thriving and well-being, it's that they're things that we can do. They're not just defaults, but they actually require some intention and attention, and seeing how it fits into your regular life.
Yeah, and it's not rocket science. I do this thing that I call the values report card. And I take the four values, I write them down, and every couple of days I grade myself 1 through 5.
I love that.
And then I'll just, without thought, just 1 through 5. And then I'll look at the one that I didn't exactly get the best score on. I'll say, okay, well, what can I do tomorrow to improve that? One thing that I'm going to do action on tomorrow. And for me, that keeps me honest with all my values. When I was writing my book and doing a tremendous amount of speaking last year, I wasn't working out and I wasn't taking care of myself physically. And so when I really got to look at my values report card, it was pretty clear that that was the thing that was consistently coming up short. And so it was what I needed to do and what I needed to change to get more harmony and more joy in my life.
I really like that idea of having a report card for yourself. Because sometimes it is like, we have these ideas of I don't like how my life is. Or I don't feel good in my life. I don't feel like I'm thriving, but we don't really take the time to sit down and figure out what's contributing to that. And so I like this idea of having something that is really clear cut, that you're familiar with, that you've set up the conditions for yourself, not for anybody else, but you've defined them for yourself, and that you can check in there to be able to see where the gaps are,
Yeah.
instead of just this like general sense of I don't like how things are.
Yeah. I mean,
Hmm.
I just turned the definition of values inside out. To me, values is what's important. Your values are what's important. And, what are the things you need in your life to thrive? And I chose values because the world has been so stuck on time management.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that when we manage our values, that's when we step into our power. And that's when everything gets really, really good. It's not about managing the microseconds, it's about managing the values, your values, and making sure that you're aligning your values and your time with what's important.
I love that. It's like I have big stars around this that I just wrote down as values management. If we start looking at our lives through values management, the something else that came to mind is this. So at the beginning, you were talking about how busyness is like a badge of honor, that people will
Mhm.
say, "How are you doing?" And if you say busy, that's like this signal to the other person that I'm so successful that I don't have time to even eat my lunch, or, like I don't have time for any of these things because I'm so busy. So if we can, oh, I just totally lost my train of thought. um oh, I know what it was. Okay, so if we have this pedestal that we have placed busyness on, I wonder how much of people being hesitant or reluctant to go through and define their own values is because we have a distrust of joy, and that we distrust pleasure. Like when you were talking about brushing and petting your cat and eating the chocolate and how much pleasure that brings you, I think that people have this idea of if it's not hard, it's not worth it, or it's not valuable, or it's not contributing to my productivity or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, there's a saying about idleness being the devil's best friend,
Mm,
and I really believe that as human beings, we've been brought up culturally to really look to try to ignore or try to not be idle because we think it's a bad thing. And so that's why a lot of times, I mean, to me, when you're idle, you aren't doing the hard work and finding out what's strategic, what makes sense, what are my values, what do I need to subtract. It's laziness, and that we all are idle aversion. There have been so many tests all over the world where you put people into a room and they can shock themselves or do something that will bring them physically pain, or just sit there and think for a couple of minutes. They will choose the pain. And so, this idleness aversion that we all have is very cultural. It's very, very real. But if you sit in the stillness, you can learn how to appreciate it. If you can sit in a pause, and I've been really focusing in on pauses when I need to take them. A pause and a response to something that is challenging or difficult. Why do I need to respond right away? That's an emotional response. Let me take a step back, push the pause button. And so, I believe that sometimes we create this chaos. And, somebody said to me, Peggy, your busy busting process is a way to choose meaning over mayhem. And that's a saying that I say a lot, meaning over mayhem, because when you have meaning in your life, you have joy in your life.
yeah, I recently learned about the difference between hedonic and eudaimonic joy or happiness, and I'll explain it to people really quick. The hedonic happiness is the pleasure, and the eudaimonic happiness is the meaning and the purpose. And I think in order for us to feel like we're really thriving in our lives, you have to have both of those things. And that I really like that phrase, choose meaning over mayhem. That the busyness, perhaps we end up using that as a distraction from a sense of meaninglessness or purposelessness, and that it is okay to be uncomfortable long enough to slow down and start asking how we can change our lives to have more meaning and have more happiness in them.
Yeah, do the work. And it's actually not all that hard. Maybe in the beginning, it's habit change, but when you take these micro steps in the busy busting process, you will feel relief right away. You will feel better right away. And so, why don't we move towards the things that make us feel good, that make us more productive, that make us better human beings? And really, that's what this is all about.
Mm. Is there anything else that you can think of that you want to tell people about? Of course, I'm going to link to your book and your website and how people can work with you in the episode notes. But is there anything that is top of mind for you or really lighting you up recently that we haven't covered yet?
Just that the busy busting process is not rocket science. It's accessible to every single human being. You can live a life that has more quality, more value, more joy. And it's really as easy as the busy busting process and just taking one tiny little micro step, like the woman I shared with you, Jennifer, who just took 5 minutes in the beginning in the morning. Everybody is 5 minutes, just give it a twirl. And I think you'll find that it just feels good and it's the right thing.
Even for the people who are thinking there's no way that 5 minutes is going to make a difference, well, then there's no risk. Like, just try it and see. I love that. Well, thank you very much for sharing your beautiful wisdom and all the wonderful stories with my listeners today. And
My
I
pleasure.
just I really appreciate you being here, Peggy. And before we go, for all of my listeners, P.S. We expire. One of my favorite quotes about grief comes from the esteemed philosopher Winnie the Pooh. How lucky I am to have something that makes saying goodbye so hard. Grief is often talked about when someone passes away, but grief is a universal feeling that crops up for many reasons. When we face an unexpected career change, when diagnosed with a chronic illness, or when someone that we love leaves. We also carry grief of unrealized hopes or dreams we've had to let go of. Sometimes we grieve previous versions of ourselves. We're often told to move on, let go, get over it, or any number of bumper sticker feel-good sayings. But grief doesn't work like that. It's not linear. Grief is widely experienced, but not widely understood. This September, I'll be at the Oak Center as a guide for an upcoming retreat on navigating grief and loss. This retreat is about giving grief the space it deserves and using it as a catalyst for intentional creation of life's next chapter. Come as you are, be seen and understood, and explore what moving forward looks like while honoring what's been lost. You can find all the details at oakcenter.com. I hope to see you there.